I think usually I like to go first because I have everyone's attention, but I'm pretty happy going last because I think it really fits in well with the papers we've had so far. So the topic today, which what I'm going to be speaking about, is that looking at the estimates of supply shortages and lost tax revenue after marijuana legalization. And hopefully, so Stephen brought up some very interesting points about the possibility of black markets, especially the prices though. And we didn't consult each other, but it's totally in correspondence of what I found. And I'm trying to get a bit more specific in terms of what could happen after legalization. And what the point of this paper is, and it's with Rosalie Wyonch, who's from CD Howe, my former student, is to demonstrate that even with the kind of prices we're talking about, the federal government's talking about a price of $10 a gram, we can have really significant black markets. But the source of the black markets might be very surprising to you, and that's the point of this paper. So the objective of this research is to offer estimates of the black market after legalization. Now, conventionally, as we all know, usually have black markets if you have high taxes, and Stephen did a really good job of talking about tobacco. Now, if the demand for marijuana is priced inelastic, which means that the demand doesn't change if the prices keep going up, then you have an industry with a lot of revenue and a lot of tax potential. And if you look at previous studies, for example, there's a CIBC study which suggests that tax revenue could be as high as $5 billion, right? But the point is that higher tax revenue is conditional on the unavailability of illegal products. That is a key point. And when you talk about what was discussed yesterday, the objectives of the federal government has been very clear that when it comes to regulating marijuana, the most important thing is that is the health perspective and that the product should meet safety guidelines. The generation of taxes are secondary. And that's kind of the narrative we've been hearing for some time. So in this spirit, there have been some recent announcements, basically at the end of last year, which have specified the tax structure. And the tax structure is that the federal taxes, so there'll be a federal tax on marijuana. And with the exception of Alberta, there's no other specific provincial tax on marijuana. And the reason Alberta has marijuana tax is because there's no sales tax in Alberta. So aside from that, the proposal is that you'll have an excise tax, which would be the higher of either $1 a gram or 10% of total purchase value, okay? And so further to this, some jurisdictions, Ontario as an example, have committed to keeping the prices at around $10 per gram. And this is for dried weed. Okay, so the point being is that if you look at the narrative so far, the policy focus has been on the demand side of the market, right? What's going to market, what people will consume, how much should we tax. But the supply side has not attracted a lot of attention, and so I think that's really worrisome for a variety of reasons. And the reason is the main reason is that it's possible that legal domestic supply will not meet demand. And if this is the case, you will have a flourishing black market. And that's what I find in this paper. So, in order to contextualize this research against other papers, I mean, Stephen's done some really good work some time ago. More recently, there's been an absence of work on marijuana in Canada, which has used empirical methods and econometric methods, and that has specifically attempted to forecast the amount of supply. So what we're doing in this paper is that we're trying to predict demand and we're trying to predict supply in the legal market after legalization, okay, for recreational marijuana. And so we try to fill this gap, and what we're doing is that we're constructing estimates for the first year of legalization. We're assuming legalization will begin July 2018. So the time period of our analysis is from July 2018 to July 2019. And so the results are basically used to construct estimates of losses in government tax revenue, because the way we look at it is that if there is a black market, there are a lot of societal costs. Yes, we know that. But in terms of being an economist, the opportunity cost we're focusing on is looking at lost tax revenue. So there are many ways to quantify it, but that's what we're focusing on. And the analysis in this paper is based on publicly available data, which really hasn't been exploited yet by many researchers. So if you go to the Health Canada website, there's really nice data on, and it's for, of course, medicinal marijuana, on inventory levels, the number of producers, the producers who are registered, sales, et cetera, et cetera. So not by firm, but in aggregate. So we use that data in order to construct our estimates. Okay, so just to give you an idea of what we find in this paper, so the results indicate that at current levels, based on the number of producers who have been licensed historically, legal supply at best will meet about 66% of actual demand. So that's of significant concern. It can even be lower. And I'll explain why it can be lower. So the amount of lost tax revenue as a result could go as high as $1.3 billion. That's the amount of tax revenue we're losing. And this is important because in order to contextualize this, there are public projections that the amount of generated tax revenue will be about $400 million. So maybe about 3 times of that amount we're actually losing. And I'll show you how we get these estimates. So this is just to give you an idea of the data. So this is the publicly available data from Health Canada on a commercial medical marijuana market. And so you see, so this is in tons, and the data are by quarter, starting from the second quarter of 2014 to the last quarter of 2017. And so you look at production, sales, and inventory and number of producers. So basically at the time when the government committed to legalization, you see the spike in everything out there. Like there are huge spikes, right? And maybe what we could focus on is looking at a number of producers. So initially, even up to sometime in 2016, there are about 30, and now there are about 80 to 90 registered producers, okay? So the first, the piece of the puzzle is trying to forecast demand. Now, how do you do that? Like, so this part of the paper is not particularly deep. What we did is that we looked at data from different jurisdictions which have legalized marijuana, right? So you have Colorado, you have Alaska, and so there are then some estimates done on Canadian data based on survey responses, which Stephen, you alluded to, right? And so when you look at the market volume, so for example, in Colorado in 2014, pre-legalization, there's some great work done by Miles Light, right, in Colorado, and they projected that the market volume would be about 121 tons. So post-legalization in the first year, with publicly available data released by the Department of Marijuana in Colorado, it was actually smaller than that, about 83 tons. And then you have population. So when you just, then you convert it to grams, and then you divide by population of legal age, what happens is that you get a per capita number out there. So you have a wide array, in the third column, you have a wide array of per capita consumption numbers, okay? And then what we do is that we kind of blow that up by Canadian population. And so the last column gives you a range of what could happen in Canada in terms of demand in the first year after legalization. And when you look at it, the range is a bit wide, and I'll discuss this now, why this is the case. It's from about 630 tons to 1,000 tons. And if you take an average, the average is about 780 tons. So it could be slightly disconcerting because this is kind of a wide interval. But the point being is that if you look at the research done by the Parliamentary Budgetary Office, their interval is actually much wider. It's from about 300 tons, 370 tons to 1,000 tons. But the other thing, and this might actually be of interest to our honored guests from Uruguay, is that in Canada, I don't know if you know this, but you might, in Canada, what's going to happen is that we're not going to stand outside in the cold for our marijuana. It's actually we'll be inside in our house, beside our fireplace, having our hot chocolate. It's going to be delivered to us. So, and that's the point. So the point being is that from a behavioral aspect, this is completely new territory, right? And there's no jurisdiction in the world in which you have marijuana which can be delivered to you, right? So what's going to happen to demand in that? I mean, haha, no one knows what I'm doing inside my house, so it can be really high demand, right? We don't know. And so when you count that in, factor that in, the demand can actually be quite high. Okay, so now this is the kind of challenging part of the paper. So in this part of the paper, what we did is that we try to construct an estimate of national supply. And we use an econometric model. So when you use an equation, you have a dependent variable and some right-hand variables which are supposed to explain the dependent variable. And if the market was legal, it would be great. We have all the data. We just project supply. But the point being is that the market's not legal. So whatever data we're using, it's an underestimate because it's for medical marijuana. Nonetheless, what we did is that we constructed a model with the first thing which we did is that we tried to estimate what opening inventory levels will be in in July, right? So come July, so when you think of how demand is going to be met in July 2018, part of it is coming directly from the producers to the market, and part of it is coming from existing inventory levels. So the first thing which you have to do is you have to estimate how much inventory there is in Canada come legalization. And so in order to do that, we basically constructed a model where historical inventory is a function of the number of licensed producers and sales. So the intuition is that we know how many producers are being licensed. And if we have an estimate, that allows us to project that given that there will be 20 or 30 more producers in about 6 months, how much supply is hitting the market. Now, it has to be a bit careful because it's not that if you get licensed today, tomorrow I can start selling my product to the market. It takes 9 months. It takes 9 months from licensing to actually shipping your product to the market. Because not only for the growth, but there's a lot of stories of trying and failing. You start putting up your product, and then you've got the wrong humidity controls, and your product just fails. So it's really, really difficult. It's not easy. Okay, so basically what we're doing, you don't have to look at the inventory. It's not really that important yet. What our results suggest that within about 3-4 months, when you have more producers, about 700 kilograms can hit the market. Okay, so that's the type of empirics which we're trying to do. Okay, so now, what we've done is that we've got our estimate of demand. We have our estimate of supply. The key question now is to ask, what will the price of marijuana be come legalization? So when you look at previous research, it ranges from about $8 to $9. The federal government has committed to about $10. And what the seminal point of this paper is that, look, you can have a black market. You can have a black market if there's a significant difference between the price which your pusher is selling on the street and the legal price. But it also could be if there's supply shortages in the market. And so when we did our simulations, what we found is that let's just take let's take 2 price points. You can take an infinitive number of price points. Let's say $8 and $10. Okay, that's a reasonable range. So when we ran our numbers, what we found is that it's a bit confusing the way it's worded, but if you have the price relatively low at $8, a bit above your $7 swing, right? Then what happens is that 60% of the market demand is going to go to legal supply, right? We know that. On the other hand, even if the price increases to just $10, then demand will dramatically shift to the illegal market. Only 37% will go. Well, it's also complicated because you see these market reactions based on price differences, but on top of that, suppose there's not enough supply to meet demand, right? So price can be low, but who cares because there's not enough legal supply. We don't need this. So let's say we use a midpoint demand estimate, conservative that come legalizations, total demand in Canada for the first year will be 783 tons. And the before tax price, let's say it's going to be $9 per gram. Okay, so what we find is that $9 is still too high a price, right, relative to what you can get from the legal market. And in order to determine that, what we did is that I'm sure most people in this room know that if you want to know what the price of weed is in your neighborhood, you go to priceofweed.com. Okay, so we went there. This is just for research. Okay, and then we scraped the data, right? We scraped the data. We got thousands of observations over time, and you can actually get good quality weed for about $7.50, right? So therefore, the point being is that if the price is $9, then the legal price is $9. What we find is that black market activity is still a concern, and the government, basically there's going to be about $900 million lost annually in terms of tax revenue, and this is in terms of the PSD and GST, basically in terms of the marijuana tax. But compounded to this is that you will also have supply shortages. And you will have supply shortages because we're playing a catch-up game. There's simply not enough licensed producers who are producing enough legal supply. And they're not going to be ready, like Stephen, you pointed to economies of scale, right? They're just not ready yet to ramp up and supply the market. So there'll be supply shortages. So when you add the supply shortages, that's going to lead to more black market activity and further lost tax revenue. So when you add everything up, in terms of the federal excess tax, that's about $237 million lost, and another about $107 million lost in GST. So to kind of summarize this is this table, and what we did is that we decomposed it by population. And so this is kind of the lost tax revenue by black market and supply shortages. So the black market is just the lost tax revenue because the price of legal weed is too high. So when you have that, there's about $400 million lost in excise taxes, sales tax about $470, and in the supply shortages, so I'm just looking at the top row for Canada, and the supply shortages, there's another about $400 million lost, both excise and tax. So when you add everything together, that's about $1.3 billion lost in taxes if the price is too high, and also because of the fact that there's not enough legal supply. There will not be enough legal supply coming to the market in the first year of legalization. Okay? So that's all my technical results. Let's try to kind of summarize it now. So, 2 minutes? Oh, good, great, okay. So in terms of summary results, so there's been really a lack of policy discussion, right? So we're talking about black market, and but the point is that the policy discussion has missed discussing the source of the black market. That's the finding from this paper. What's really important is not only the fact that there could be a differential in legal and illegal prices because of taxes, but also because there won't be enough supply coming to the market. And so we have a significant losses in tax revenue as a result of that. Okay, so compounding this is that we have no idea how the market's actually going to work, because relative to Uruguay, Portugal, even California and Colorado, there's no jurisdiction which has online delivery, right? We're really in uncharted territory. So, but these are still quite conservative estimates based on that. Okay, so this is something which I'm going to scoot through. Continuing black market is bad. It's bad for a variety of reasons. Criminal activity, lost tax revenue, health considerations. We don't want people consuming contaminated products which haven't been through supply controls, okay? And also the point is that we don't know what the sweet point is, right? We know that consumers would be willing to pay higher prices for something which has been vetted and legal, but we don't know what the difference is. I don't know from your experience if you have an idea how much more they're willing to tolerate, but yeah, just that's it, right? That's simple enough. And so So the point is that shortages in legal supply are a problem. Okay, I'm just going to. So shortages in legal supply are important, and what the government should really be doing, I'll just skip this. The point is that Health Canada has been licensing more producers, but it's a bit too late, right? It takes 9 months. So what the government should be doing and thinking about is actually importing. Now, you can't import regular marijuana, but there are provisions that, and agreements between countries that you can actually import medicinal marijuana. That's possible. So if there's some policy which allows to meet the shortage of supply by getting more medicinal marijuana from abroad and actually meeting the demand for medicinal marijuana, so there's more left for recreational marijuana, that's one way to go. We haven't seen any activity in this direction, but this is something which I think is really important to consider. And thank you.